Hey everybody, Who's Your Jedi here with another review for you. This time I'm going to be talking about episode 11 of season 1 of Ultimate Spider-Man called Venomous. Now, if you'll recall, the last time we had an episode with Venom in it, I did not care for that episode, and I basically pronounced it the worst episode of the season up to that point. That's a claim that I'm going to stick by here as well. This episode is, in general, noticeably stronger than that episode, but being noticeably stronger than the worst episode of a season isn't really a huge thing to go crying to mom about. But anyway, before I dive into the review, I do have to give you guys a quick apology. I know this review is going up about 3 or 4 days late. The simple fact of the matter is my job required that I go out of town for 3 days. And I was sort of stuck basically out in the boonies with almost no internet. So I really just could not get the chance to watch and do an episode review. And honestly, if I'd even tried to do a review from my iPad or my phone, it would have looked like complete crap. So I respect you guys too much to do a crappy quality, at least in terms of video quality review. Whether or not you think my comments and insights are crappy, well, that's your personal taste. But I do not want to try and give you guys a video like that. It just wouldn't be good. So I figured, well, better wait until I get home and then do that. I got home yesterday, but I just had so much to do. Had to go get groceries and all this other stuff. All the stuff you have to do when you go out after you get back from going out of town for a while. And by the time I got it all done, it was just late and I was tired. But anyway, so you do have my apology there, but let's get right into it. The first thing we get to see in this episode is also the return of Batroc the Leaper. And here he's presented what I consider it slightly less silly than the last time we saw him. He's still sort of goofy, but I like that they seem to be presenting Batroc as a little bit, well, basically a little bit less like some sort of zany Pepe Le Pew turned into a kickboxing savant is his martial arts style, using villain. If you've ever read his incredibly ridiculous accent the way it's denoted in the comics, it's basically like every ridiculous French accent you have ever heard. Now, granted, he does sport that here in the TV show, but at least he's shown to be, as I said, a somewhat competent character in that regard. And I do have to give the show's creative team a lot of credit. The scene where Batroc slowly starts to sense that something is very, very wrong, and that this isn't ordinary Spider-Man that he's dealing with, and that he has a genuinely good reason to be afraid. I thought that was really done exceptionally well. There is a very strong use of atmosphere in that scene. You can understand, you can put yourself in Batroc's shoes and understand why slowly he's beginning to sense that something is not right and that he has a good reason to be afraid. So, since this is, of course, a children's TV show, we have to stay away from Venom's old comic book habit of eating people's brains. Seriously, that was sort of his almost his battle cry for a while in the 90s about how he wanted to eat Spider-Man's brain. And apparently he actually did eat people's brains a few times in the comics. That's how he got slapped with the whole lethal protector thing. Although, forgive me if I'm a little fuzzy on the details there. I wasn't really reading Spider-Man at that point during the 90s, and frankly, from what I hear, I don't think I missed out on too much. At least nothing worth reading. But anyway, after it's all over with, New York City is outraged. Outraged, I say, that someone administered a brutal beating to a known international thief and criminal. Look, folks, I've never been to New York City, but I gotta get the feeling that New Yorkers who are not unjustifiably known as a somewhat cynical lot would probably probably not just stand up and cheer. They would probably form a Facebook fan club for anybody who went out there and beat the living heck out of a known international criminal thief, and depending on some of your interpretations of some of his actions in the comics, outright terrorist like Batroc the Leaper. But no, New York City, led once again in defiance of all rationality, even by his standards, by J. Jonah Jameson, are just really, really, really upset that Spider-Man beat the heck out of this evil French guy. Alright, hold on one second. There was just tea in that, but the ridiculousness of that kind of called for something a little stronger. But I have work tomorrow. But anyway, so we move to the Helicarrier for a really bizarre and almost equally ridiculous conversation between Spider-Man, the Amazing Friends, and Nick Fury. And during all of this, we do get will give is a very amusing scene with Peter's sort of spin the wheel decision of how he's going to handle the situation. I will give the writers credit for doing that. I thought that let's try that again and make sense. For the way they handled that scene, I thought it was genuinely very funny and fit with the tone of what they're going for in this show. But anyway, so Peter decides he's going to admit, yeah, I know who's in there, but I'm not going to tell you. And of course, Nick Fury and the Amazing Friends are understandably upset by this. But so they start giving Spider-Man grief about teamwork and all of this. And White Tiger, being who she is, somehow thinks that accusing Peter of, not being a team player and all of this, a response that should go hand in hand with that is to threaten to either beat Peter up or beat the information out of him if he won't give it up. I mean, let's take that. Her thinking goes hand in hand is, you need to trust us and be cooperative with us and help us because we're your teammates and all of this. And if you don't, I'm going to beat the living heck out of you. For teamwork. Look, folks, Wolverine might have been able to get away with that, but Ava is no Wolverine. All right, here she just comes off as being honestly hypocritical. Seriously, it reminds me of that joke that some people like to hang around their office, that saying that goes, the beatings will continue until morale improves. And Nick Fury, surprisingly to me, plays this pretty cool. I honestly thought out of anybody, it would have been him who would have been, making threats towards Peter. But no, he plays it cool, and I do think it's fair to give credit to Nick Fury for that. Let's see. Let's move on. Then we jump to seeing Harry. He's our honestly for the guy who's possessed by the Venom symbiote in this episode, Harry's doesn't have a whole lot of presence here. Now, I granted you could make the case that they're trying to focus on what Venom is like with no human influence, with just Harry as the host, the guy who is trapped and sort of along for this outright hellish ride. He's sort of like those poor guys that are taken over by the Goa'uld in the Stargate TV show. But anyway, when we do see him at school, Harry looks absolutely horrible. He's got these big rings from his eyes. He's acting so that you can tell that he's lying through his teeth. And of course, Peter is justifiably concerned about this. And this scene basically, to me, really had a very strong you think your friend is on drugs theme, which is actually quite fitting for Harry Osborne, because as I'm pretty sure I've mentioned in my other reviews, there was a storyline from the 1970s in the comic books where Harry was genuinely addicted to drugs. So, and of course, this being a kids show, they aren't going to go there. But you could sort of make the case that in a way, the Venom symbiont is a drug. It is a drug that gives Harry power, a sense of control, a sense of destiny, and something like that is not surprisingly addictive. And we do see Harry doing things like taking extremely unnecessary risks, lying to his friends, all again, all the things that very much fit into a drug addiction sort of storyline. But of course, this is a superhero comic book universe, so rather than your friend is like hooked on meth, your friend is hooked on using a biologically engineered semi-sentient supersuit to go around New York City beating up people he doesn't like. Yeah, ain't comics great? Before I move on, one thing I have to say is, did you notice when Peter was getting ready in the morning? Uh, he's a pretty cut guy. I mean, how have the other folks at that school noticed that Peter is actually in what seems to be very good shape? I mean, if Flash Thompson it was to even like sort of pay attention to Peter's arms, he'd notice they're pretty muscular, and you'd think, being a jock, a guy whose whole thing is, physicality and sizing up whether or not he could take other people in a fight. Not as a diss to anybody out there who's a jock. I'm not saying that everybody who's into sports and stuff is like that. I'm just saying that this is what Flash is like. You'd think that he would have picked up on this. I mean, even as dumb as he is. But let's face it, giving depth to Flash Thompson's character is pretty darn low on the list of priorities this show has. And if I can just also take a moment, just take another side. You remember during that argument where there's the whole police officers can't use violence thing is thrown out there? On what planet is that? Now look, I'm not trying to insult cops here, but last time I checked, police officers had access to guns, tasers, pepper spray, nightsticks, tear gas, SWAT teams, flash grenades. Of course, police officers generally will, not generally, they're trained for this, only go to violence as an absolute last resort. But saying that police officers don't use violence? I'm sorry, that's just not true. So I'm going to leave it at that. Let's not bring any kind of politics or personal issues into this. We're just talking about kids' cartoons here, all right? But anyway, let's move on to our big final. Oh yeah, sorry, I almost forgot. Speaking of folks besides Flash Thompson who are also dumb, what is wrong with Norman Osborn that he does not pick up immediately that something is really wrong with Harry? Now, granted, we've seen a lot of evidence that Norman just sort of tends to tune Harry out, and anything Harry says, 95% of the time, Norman's just going to be like, yeah, Harry, whatever. But let's face it, Harry is standing right in front of him, looking, again, like a complete and utter drug addict. I mean, Norman's a guy from New York City. I'm sure he knows what a drug addict looks like. Heck, I'm sorry, I'm pretty sure you don't even have to be from a big city like New York to know what a drug addict looks like. I mean, you just have to have been around the block from a few times. I mean, I'm not from a terribly big town, but I've been around, I've seen stuff. I know what somebody who's really messed up on drugs looks like. But anyway, and of course the whole, shouting and screaming and looking like he's on drugs. And of course, it sort of kills my believability that Norman is still going to just blow Harry off in this situation, especially given that we have seen multiple times that despite being a big jerk and a bad parent, Norman really does care about Harry. And yeah, there has to be a limit where even a bad parent is going to say like, hang on, Bill, I'm going to have to call you back for a second. Son, what the heck is wrong with you? But anyway, let's move on to our big confrontation with Venom at the end. First of all, again, I have to give a lot of credit to the production team for the way... Sorry, there's a fly in here again. For the way this fight was handled. First of all, I really like the way they do Venom's voice here. I think it might even actually be a slight improvement over the voice that was used for Venom in the 90s Spider-Man cartoon, which really is about the gold standard for Spider-Man cartoons, as far as I'm concerned. But anyway, the part where he goes, "I'll break your soul." I mean, geez, that's genuinely kind of creepy. I mean, yes, it sounds an awful lot like "I'll swallow your soul, I'll swallow your soul" from the Evil Dead Army of Darkness movies, which incidentally I happen to absolutely love. But anyway, that was still genuinely, like I said, a really creepy moment. I mean, I can understand anybody hearing that, like, wanting to take a little step back and maybe have second thoughts about fighting Venom here. But of course, we get none of that from the Amazing Friends, who honestly seem to just flat out be out for blood here. They really seem to want payback for Venom. And the outright callousness that they have for whoever is trapped in there is actually extremely, to me, disturbing. I mean, remember, the very first lesson that Peter imparted to the Amazing Friends is, above all, you protect the innocent. And if their previous encounters with Venom, or even worse, the tutelage that they've been receiving from Nick Fury, has made it so that they're willing to just completely write off that person. I mean, Luke Cage even says, whoever's in there is gone, even though he has absolutely no evidence of this. I mean, guys, this is really, really something that you should be worried about if you're seeing this in your superheroes. But anyway, that doesn't, of course, that I can't talk. But anyway, this is such an issue here that Peter is actually willing to, as we see, now that granted this is the first time it happens, that Peter's actually willing to essentially all but fight the Amazing Friends the first time that they throw down with Venom. Now the second time around, Peter has confided in them, he has shown trust in them, so they're more willing to follow his lead, to take that shot at making the anti-Venom, which Peter is able to whip up using stuff that's laying around a high school chemistry lab. Now, look, I know that trying to point out that that's ridiculous and unrealistic is honestly ridiculous under these circumstances. It's established that at 15 years old, using chemicals that a 15-year-old could legally get his hands on, Peter invented the spider webbing, some sort of miraculous chemical concoction, and he even reminds us in this episode, he also invented his web shooters. So this actually is very in keeping with what we see from Peter's character. And do keep in mind, I've also mentioned this in my previous videos, it's established that Peter's real specialty when it comes to science, and granted he's good at a great many things regarding science, but his main area of genius is in biochemistry. So again, all of this really, really fits with what we have seen previously in the show, and just overall the character of Peter Parker. So I do have to give the writers, a lot of credit for really tapping into the Spider-Man mythology and channeling that. Anyway, so of course Venom is defeated, and Harry is saved, and all this other stuff. Blah 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 blah. And of course, by the end, the Amazing Friends have chosen to acknowledge, say like, yeah, good job, Spider-Man. I'm glad that you put some trust in us. So of course, we're going to let these robots beat the heck out of you. The Amazing Friends have an extraordinarily disturbing interpretation of friendship, I think. But anyway, before I kind of wrap things up, one thing I do have to say that I liked was the way that they sort of brought up the whole anti-Venom thing. It just reminds me of how in the comics, Flash Thompson is now Venom, and Eddie Brock is now anti-Venom, the guy with the superhuman symbiote who really has a big mad-on to kill Venom. Yeah. Honestly, folks, I've been reading I have had the chance to read some of those comics recently. It's actually quite a bit better than it sounds. But anyway, overall, as I said, this is an improvement over the last time that we saw Venom, but it's really not much of an improvement. In fact, I'd honestly have to say that this episode is at best so-so, and maybe even a little weak. Just the way that the Amazing Friends were acting this episode just seemed extraordinarily unheroic to me. And that really took away a lot from this episode, in my opinion. But anyway, folks, that's all I have for this time. As always, please comment, rate, and subscribe. And of course, you can also follow me on Twitter at Hoosier Jedi. If you, I did announce the fact that I was going to be out of town on both my channel and on my Twitter. So if you want to keep up with the latest of what's going on with that channel, and occasionally hear me spout off random thoughts that I have that are hopefully entertaining, do check out my Twitter. But anyway, folks, take care and have a good one. Until next time.